Hey gamers, this is Liz Davidson for Beyond Solitaire, and today I'm going to be reviewing Endurance, designed by Amabel Holland. Alright, so here's a basic setup for Endurance. This is a solitaire game from Holland Spiel that is about the Shackleton expedition. This is an expedition that attempted to reach Antarctica. It did not go well. The ship ends up stuck. The men end up stuck for months and months and months until they actually manage to send out a lifeboat that gets them help. But really, the fact that all of these men survived this extremely long, months and months long experience and did not die is a miracle. And this game is really supposed to evoke that, not by letting you achieve what the Shackleton expedition achieved, but by being so brutal that it illustrates how difficult that must have been. And so this is a game that is basically about having limited resources that degrade over time, and having morale that also starts to degrade over time. And then, essentially you're going to lose a bunch of people, most likely. One thing that's kind of interesting about this game is it does not have a win condition. It does not have a loss condition. You just do how you do, and you see how your expedition turns out. Frankly, every time you lose someone, you're going to feel like you've lost something, but there is no official win-loss condition for this game, which I think is quite interesting. But this game is going to go through several phases that mirror the progress of the Shackleton expedition. So you're going to start out with the Endurance, which was their ship, and therefore the title of the game, set up with some supplies on it, but it's stuck in the ice. The ship is eventually going to sink, and there's an event card in your deck that is going to bring that event about. But for a while, you have the ability to go and get supplies from here. You've also got these groups of men. Some of them are doing okay on their blue side. Some of them are demoralized on their red side. They can go from demoralized to sick and from sick to dead, depending on the progress of the game. Your camp is also going to change in kind of a mirror of what happens on the actual expedition. So you get your guys in their starting state. You get your supplies. There's a space for an active event. And there are a combination of different card types that are in your decks. So this is my draw deck. This is just a discard pile that has some events in it, by the way. And then you've got an event deck. And these events are wild. So you're going to have things like malnutrition, sea leopard attack, true words said in jest, but basically you make jokes that make you upset, broken ice, surgery. There's some really serious stuff that goes on in these events. And those aren't even the worst ones. We'll talk about that in a moment. So basically, you are going through your deck and just trying to keep going through the progress of the game. So on your first turns, and things get worse later, by the way, you draw 2 cards, and you choose 1 card for its action, and then 1 card for its test. So actions involve hunting, so that's why you've got these little penguins. There wasn't much else to hunt, but you could go hunt penguins. You could sled, which means that you take your dogs over to the Endurance and try to get supplies off of it, but your dogs aren't going to last. We're going to talk about that. Or you can entertain. And so there are some supplies in here like a deck of cards, a book, a phonograph that bring entertainment and joy to the men and let you flip them from their demoralized to their better blue side. And that's going to matter partially because you can lose by being demoralized, and partially because these die rolls on here determine the die values you're going to need in order to successfully test during these actions. So when you take an action, you don't automatically succeed. You have to roll dice against these values and count up your successes and see how many of them you have and therefore how well you did on your mission. If you succeed, you get a reward. Maybe it's food, it's to flip somebody back over from their demoralized side. It's to get supplies from the Endurance in some quantity. So if you roll enough successes, you succeed. If you fail, it's going to cause problems, partially because you need the stuff and partially because it's just a bummer. You also have tests. So you do 1 card for its action, you do another for the test. So tests include food tests, so you have to be able to feed yourself. Tests can include morale tests, where you see how well everybody is doing emotionally. You have heat tests, where you better have some blubber to keep yourself warm. And you also have medical tests, where somebody has gotten sick, and you're going to have to see what supplies you have to help them out. And these tests can be passed with just flipping men over to their demoralized side, but you really don't want to do that. What you prefer to have is supplies. So these are the supplies that you can use, and of course you can supplement from the endurance, at first anyway. But every time you use these supplies, you have to roll to see if those supplies degrade. And then if the supplies degrade, you're going to have to see if they get discarded on future rolls. So your supplies are also not going to last you, and you don't really know how long they're going to last because you're going to need some die rolls to help you with that. And then if you fail your test, you have to take the penalty, which is to bring down the morale of the men who are on the card. So if we failed a morale test, we would have to resolve penalties for number 24 and number 26, and the numbers correspond to chits up here. So that's just the first round of the game. Eventually, you're going to have to draw 3 cards instead of 2. And then in addition to the penalty from failing a test, you're going to have to resolve 1 penalty from one of the cards. So you just keep getting punished and punished and punished as you go. There's also eventually going to be a phase, if you make it that far, where your men are taking lifeboats to a new location. And essentially you're going to have to bring out these lifeboats cards that have different die roll combos that you're going to have to get and pass basically the tests on these cards in order to get the lifeboats across. So even if you've made it pretty far into the game, the odds that you're going to lose at least 1 lifeboat are pretty big. So that's tough. And then on top of that, this game asks you to make some hard choices, including literally an event card called the Hard Choice. So this one makes you remove all of your dogs and Mrs. Chippy, the cat, who actually is a boy, but was named Mrs. Chippy before everybody knew that. So you gain meat, but you have to demoralize a bunch of people because you killed all the animals. So this is something the actual Shackleton expedition did. Everybody had to do this, including Chippy, who was Mrs. Chippy's owner, who never ever got over it, and frankly, neither would I. But basically, when you've gotten everything from the endurance that you're going to get, and the dogs are no longer useful, the question is, do you eat your dogs? And do you kill the cat? And intelligently speaking, in terms of survival, the answer is yes. But emotionally, the choice is horrible. And instead of just make it happen automatically, the way that Shackleton ordered on his expedition, Amabel Holland lets you make that choice as part of this game. So Endurance is essentially a game that is a huge bummer all the way through because you are constantly failing tests, worrying about your supplies, having to kill your dogs, having to deal with people who are demoralized, having bad things happen like malnutrition. This game is rough, and all the rough stuff that's in the game is in fact based on real historical events. So all of the cards that Amabel has included in this game, all the chits, all of the resources, all of it are tied to actual accounts of the Shackleton expedition. So as you're sitting here worried about how you're going to do, you have to sit there and think about the fact that some people actually lived through this and survived, which is part of what makes the game interesting. So now you have a basic overview of what's in here and of play. Why don't we go ahead and have some final thoughts about that? Because yes, this game is a bit of a bummer, especially if things don't go well, but I don't think that that means that you shouldn't play it. So let's have a conversation about that.
All right, so now for some final thoughts. I mentioned this game is a bummer, but I also said that doesn't mean I think you shouldn't play it. So what do I mean by that? I mean that Endurance is one of those games that is an art piece, I think. So what Endurance is trying to do is create an experience to really evoke something. And I think that all of the game's decisions are directed towards that. And a lot of the more gamey elements, like winning and losing, are removed. And that doesn't mean that this doesn't play like a game. Endurance, in fact, does play well enough as a game to be enjoyable that way while you play it. So thinking about how to allocate resources, thinking about which test to pass, trying to get your stuff from the Endurance, trying to figure out how to portion out the dice when you're doing your lifeboat run. All of those things absolutely work together exactly the way that a traditional board game does. So Endurance is not so far off the path that a normal person who plays games could not play and enjoy it. That said, the game mechanisms that it uses are employed for something that you don't see in a lot of games, which is pure evocation of experience, as opposed to winning and losing, which of course are not even present in this game. Amabel Holland decided to design this without a win condition, without a loss condition. And that means that this is a game fully as experience, as opposed to game as game, if you believe that it's only a game if you can win or lose. And so I think that maybe this isn't something that you're going to play a whole lot because it's not like you can exactly have a high score. And, once you've seen all of the cards and experienced the despair enough times, I think maybe this isn't a game that you play a lot. It's not going to be your favorite game that you played 100 times in a row. It might be a game that you can't bring yourself to get rid of, a game that you pull out every few years, a game that makes you go read a book about the topic of the game. That's the kind of game that this is. And so if that's what you're looking for, then you're going to love Endurance. But if what you want is just a traditional game straight up, then this may not be for you. If you're open to an experience or you're curious, I actually think Endurance is very much worth a try. That said, I really love the way that everything in this game is inspired by and threaded with history. The flavor text in this one is actually great. And I really enjoyed reading the event cards, even though they did terrible things to me, because they kind of explain why things are done the way they're done. I loved looking through the rule book and getting little details about who Mrs. Chippy was and, which crew members were mutinous and how people felt about the photographer, but they were also willing to listen to his lectures to keep them entertained. How, the depression that people who went hunting felt when they had to kill penguins affected their morale because penguins are apparently super sweet and don't know to be afraid of humans, and it was really emotionally awful to hunt them. Those things all come into this game, and as you learn about the Shackleton expedition through Amabelle's eyes, as she teaches it to you, through her rulebook, through her events, through her flavor text, I really feel like it creates an experience where you really understand why Shackleton's expedition is so remarkable. And you really get to feel for the little chits on the board because, you can't help but become attached once you've seen enough pictures of these people. The cards use real pictures from the photographer on the expedition, from learning little stories about them and what they like to do and what kinds of jokes they like to tell. It really makes the game emotionally gutting in a way that not all games are actually able to achieve. And so for that, this game deserves huge props. And I think that Amabelle's decisions about this come out the most strongly when you play the event card, the hard choice. And that's the one where you have to decide if you're going to kill the animals. So it's interesting, Amabelle herself emotionally has to process what's happening in this game. And you can tell because she allows you to try to keep your dogs, to put them on the lifeboat. Even though by the time the actual lifeboat sequence would have happened, historically, the dogs had long been dead, had long been eaten. There was no room for these dogs on these lifeboats. But she admits her sentimentality and allows you to try to keep the dogs because that's a lot. I think that's a lot about her as a person. I think our desire to do that says a lot about us as people who are able to feel empathy and to, get attached to animals, even if it's just like a little piece of cardboard. And I also just love her allowing her sentimentality to come out in this particular way in the game, especially because I often do make the hard choice when I play it, and I feel crappy every time I do. And I also think that this game is touching because it's about playing against really, really hard odds and how miraculous it is that the Shackleton expedition made it. And Amabelle herself does describe it as a miracle. So I'll quote from her rulebook. So she says, the crew of the Endurance suffered through disaster piled atop disaster, any single one of which might have, perhaps should have, resulted in their deaths. Their survival was indeed a miracle, an impossible, unbelievable thing. This game reflects that. It positions the historical result as a fluke. It evokes the miracle not through recreation, but absence. And so that is what I really love about Amabelle's games in general and Endurance in particular. It's not a game that you play to try to beat your high score. It's a game that you play in order to experience and to learn and to have an emotional response. It is game as art. It is game as statement about both history and life. And if that is the kind of game that you're into, which if you watch this channel, you know I absolutely am, then Endurance is a game for you. And if it's not, that is fine. Don't buy it though. And if you're curious, then I actually recommend giving this one a try. I found it tremendously evocative. So that is Endurance from Amabelle Holland. Thank you so much for watching this review. Please like, subscribe, comment, ask questions, give on Patreon if you're feeling generous, and most of all, happy gaming.